Hello, this is Josh Grote. I'm joined here today by Devon Payne and Nick Dvorak, and we're here today to talk a little bit about esports and the difference in mindset between the more casual player, the guy who's a little experienced, and the person who's been doing a lot of esports. So we'll start off with our beginner to esports. Devon, what game do you play, and how many hours do you have in that game?
I play Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, and I have 92 hours in that game.
How would you describe yourself skill level-wise with your 92 hours of playtime?
In terms of ranking from Copper to Diamond, Silver 3.
That's pretty decent for 92 hours. So coming to me here, my primary game at this point is PUBG, and I have 469 hours in PUBG, and I'd consider myself relatively decent at the game. There's no real ranking system in the game that's good at measuring skill. So then we come here to Nick. What game do you play and how many hours do you have?
I play Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and I have roughly 4,700 hours in the game, but there's no way of knowing I have a lot of accounts. And I'd consider myself, above average.
Above average? Do you have a specific rank in CSGO terms that you would use to describe yourself?
Yeah, CSGO averages from silver to gold, and then above that there's like 7 extra ranks, and I'm LEM, and that's third rank from the highest in the game.
Okay, so not quite global elite, but pretty good.
Yeah, and also once you get to a certain point, you don't really play matchmaking anymore, so it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, that would make sense. So with CSGO, what he's talking about with that, with CSGO, there is third-party matchmaking systems such as Faceit and ESEA, which offer you a more competitive matchmaking pool to play in. There are actual pros that play in ESEA, and I was actually told earlier today by Mr. Seth that 5-stacking in ESEA is actually dangerous because you will end up running into pro teams. Is that true?
Not pro teams, just pro players. And it's very hard to find a game because the higher up you get in skill groups, ESEA is ranked in, there's levels A, B, C, and D, and each of those has like A+, A, and then A-. So each category is subgrouped into 3 separate categories. So I'm B+, and the rest of our team sits at a B-. So if we queue as a 5-stack, it'll average our ranks, and it'll say, all right, since they have teamwork here, we should queue them higher than their ranks to make it fair for the opposition. And you'll get queued with players that are quite literally the highest ranked players in the ESEA. So yeah, it is kind of a balance, and that does happen.
So, Devon, as somebody who's a bit newer to the system, does something like what CS:GO have there, does that intimidate you a little bit, or would you see opportunities in like a third-party matchmaking system for Rainbow Six? So do you think Rainbow Six's matchmaking system is good enough on its own?
I think that Siege's ranking system, there we go. I think their ranking system is fine as it is. A third-party system would definitely help in some regard, because there have been a lot of complaints with a recent update to the ranking system that each player is ranked based on MMR. Don't ask me what that stands for, I don't know. It's a magical number that decides your rank. And if you have a friend you want to play ranked with, but they are 1,000 MMR either below or above you, if they are outside of that 1,000-point range, you won't be able to play ranked with them.
So that's a little bit problematic for somebody that would not be quite as skilled, wanting to play with one of their more skilled friends. Is that right?
Yeah, like I get my rank placements done, I get Silver 2, and I want to play with Toru, who is like Gold 3, Plat 1, I might not be able to do that since he would have a much, much higher MMR than I would.
Nick, is there a system similar to this that exists in CSGO?
Yeah, in CSGO, it has the same, ranking structure. There's, different levels you progress from as you get more hours, as you get better in the game. And once you're 5 levels apart from your friends, you can't queue with them. And that's what I was getting to in the beginning, where I was saying, I think I have 4,700 hours, but I'm not quite sure, because I have a lot of accounts. I have accounts at each one of those little skill ranges, so I can always play with my friends. And that makes matchmaking in Counter-Strike somewhat of a casual thing, which is why we kind of need those third-party systems, especially because the tick rate of our servers in matchmaking is due to.
Just as a reference, when they refer to matchmaking rank, they're referring to a skill-based matchmaking system where, based on how well you perform in your games, you'll be matched against people that are of equivalent level. So it's not like a EXP leveling system where the more you play, the higher your level goes. No, not necessarily. The more you win, the more you perform well, that's where your reward comes from. So if we're going to look at matchmaking systems here, let's actually look at something that's being done for our PeaceMG esports at the moment right now, which is random seeding. So considering that matchmaking for these games uses a skill-based bracket, what is your opinion on going to something like a collegiate event where seeding, even after doing a qualifier round, where seeding is based randomly in order to give the most fair chance, quote unquote, to the upper or to the top teams to play well each week?
I don't know. I see it from like a tournament organizer's point of view, and might have a detrimental effect. Because if you randomly seed and then you end up with a lot of good teams on one side of the bracket, then you might not have a good final. And then when you get to that final, it might not draw as many viewers. So a lot of people, especially in the Counter-Strike scene, they don't use random seeding. They go off of the world rankings. But as a competitor, it's nice. It gives you a chance. Because if you are the bottom seed coming in, you made it through the play-ins, but all of a sudden, first round, you have to play the number one team in the world. It's really rough, and it doesn't give you a full opportunity to get to your fullest potential in the game. So I see both points of view. I don't really know. I don't have a strong opinion either way.
Devin, do you have a strong opinion either way on that?
Well, I think with a game like PeaceMG, where you drop into a location that has randomly generated loot, if you and your team just get garbage loot, you're kind of gimped from the get-go, and you might get knocked out. So I think in that regard, having random seeding kind of gives more of a fair chance. But at the same time, there's also the possibility that a top-tier team could just make some really, really bad loot end up working out for them and come out on top at the end.
Well, that would be the hope anyways. PeaceMG Esports actually tries to rectify that a little bit by increasing your loot spawns pretty dramatically. So it's pretty easy to get looted in esports. It's not so easy that it's just go into one house and you're kitted out, but it's less prohibitive in that regard.
You'll be able to find a weapon without a problem.
For the most part.
Okay, that makes things a bit more balanced in that regard, I suppose.
Right. So as the captain for the PeaceMG team, I should actually probably voice my input on this. I think they're random. I understand where they're coming from with the random seeding system. When they have prize money on the line like they do, they want to give the top teams the best chance to compete at an equal level every week. When we played last year, they had a different system in place where they had two separate leagues, and based on how you would perform each week, your position in those leagues could change. You had the Premier League at the top and the Challenger League at the bottom, and if you were top 4 of Challenger and bottom 4 of Premier, your places would get swapped for the week. So the top 4 would go up and the bottom 4 would go down. The issue that ended up coming from this format, from how it was explained to me, was that Premier teams would purposefully sandbag into Challenger in order to get basically an easy week of competition. And even though Challenger had a reduced point pool that you could be awarded from, the kill totals in Challenger you had the same amount of points per kill. So you would have teams that would go and they would drop a tremendous amount of kills in these Challenger games, regardless of where they're placing, and they would end up coming out way on top, apparently, going into the next week in Premier. I didn't realize this could happen, and I see the merit behind the random seeding they're doing now based on that. But as somebody who's the captain of an up-and-coming team, so to say, it makes it a little difficult for us to compete sometimes when we're going up against teams that have been in the top position for basically since the league was started several years ago. So, Nick, is there is there this sort of thing that you encounter in CSGO at all, where being more of a fledgling program here at Morningside, where you guys have issues with facing off against teams that have been more established for longer?
Our biggest issue is in our size of talent pool, or just players in general. Our recruiting program for Counter-Strike is kind of dog shit. So what happens here at Morningside is we tend to recruit for bigger name games like League of Legends and Overwatch, just because that's what's easy to find recruits for, and we get a huge amount of players, more so than we need to compete, even if they're at subpar levels for those other games. But for here at Morningside, Counter-Strike barely gets recruited at all. It's not even shown up on the website as a possible thing you can get a scholarship for. So it is very hard for us to come by new people, and we only have 4 people here right now that are eligible to play and can play every week. So we can't compete with other colleges in these leagues at all right now. And what that means for us as a program trying to grow is if people are having bad weeks, there's no incentive to do better. There's no drive. Everyone's automatically in the starting position on the varsity roster, and it makes it kind of laid back. Whereas other programs, they're practicing twice, 3 times a week, every week, and based on performance, you're dropped, you're moved up. There's no flexibility there at all. And along with that, our program isn't developed as much. They have coaches, they have more rigorous practice schedules and stuff fleshed out over the years, so they're training for more hours, and the training is consistently better.
So the main point that I'm hearing here is that esports at other schools, at least for CS, is treated more like an actual sport than is treated like a game that you would play for fun.
It's not necessarily that it's treated less like a sport. It's just treated more like a thing in general. It's like clubs. Clubs can be run really, really well, or they can be like religion club where you kind of show up. It's still running well, but you show up and then you kind of listen for 5 minutes, eat food, and then you leave. And that's great if you want to attract new people to Morningside University. You get them here. They get X amount of money off their tuition, but they're still paying us that tuition for their college. It's a great business thing. But I think they need to invest in it as an actual sport. Yeah, I guess you're right. I don't really consider esports to be sports.
But something similar, at least.
You have to put in the time, and you have to focus on it in order to improve. And if you don't focus on the program, you don't focus on the resources the program has, there's no way it's going to improve enough to where we can actually compete. It's just here as a marketing ploy to get kids to come.
I actually really agree with you there, and I'll talk about my PUBG point here in a second here. But, Devon, how exactly did you hear about the Rainbow Six team on campus?
Through you, I'm pretty sure.
So, just as a reference here, Devon is our middle child, so to say, in this podcast. I'm a senior, he's a junior, and Nick is a sophomore. When you came in, did you hear at all about an esports program when you were brought into the college?
I knew there was an esports program. I knew that Overwatch was one of the main things that they had. I didn't have any interest in really doing esports, and I guess I kind of fell into the R6 community without really having any way to play the game because I don't have any up-to-date consoles or computers that can run it. And I guess I was offered more or less to petition Dean Stevens to be like, hey, I want to play Rainbow Six Siege. Would I be able to use one of the Nexus computers for that? And the long and short of it is, yes, he did.
So part of what Devon is saying here then is that esports at Morningside is a little bit rocky in some regards. I appreciate the need for actual popularity of a game in order to have an esports program for it. But at the same time, I feel like we've limited ourselves a little bit. And PUBG in that regard is actually in a really similar pool. We're all three in a really similar pool here where our games are not necessarily represented very well at Morningside. Because when the program was initially started my freshman year, when it was originally started in 2016, the original premise was basically entirely Overwatch and League of Legends. So they started off small, and they grew from there. I think one of the main issues right now, though, is that the growth has been, stymied a little bit because they're not necessarily promoting it as well. So when you were touring to come here, Nick, were you made aware of an esports program? Were you made aware that CSGO was a possible game you could play for it?
When I was first, applying to colleges, I didn't know where I wanted to go. So I just applied to every college in like a 50-mile radius. Got accepted all of them. But there is no distinguishing feature at all. Some of them, like Midland, like here, had little buttons you could click on the application saying you're interested in esports. And I clicked them, and there's a little descriptor box, and it's like, which game do you play? Do you either play League of Legends or do you play Overwatch? And I was talking to the counselor afterwards, after I'd gotten accepted. I was like, hey, there's this Overwatch program, or esports program rather, but I noticed I only have these 2 games. Are you interested in branching out into Counter-Strike at all? Because that's a game I actually play and would like to play for you. She goes, I don't know. Text Dean Stevens, who is the guy who runs the whole esports program here, and let him know. Let him know you'd be willing to play, and see if you can get a scholarship through that way. So in order to get accepted to Morningside on an esports scholarship for Counter-Strike or Rainbow Six or for PUBG, you have to, right now as an incoming freshman, you have to apply online. You have to notice that there's an esports thing that doesn't include your game, make a special note to later then contact a counselor about it so you can text the esports director to see if your game's allowed. Now that is why we don't get a lot of applicants. 100% of our incoming Counter-Strike players this year were people who I brought in, or rather one person that I brought in because I knew him before and I wanted him to play Counter-Strike with us. No one else from the surrounding area even knows that this is a thing. And the reason that this is so tragic is that we offer more in scholarships than the number one Counter-Strike team in the country in the Collegiate League. They've won the grand prize of like $50,000 to $80,000 the last like 7 years running, and they have $2,500 a year scholarship. We have $5,000.
So what we're saying is that there's a lack of promotion here. We've gotten some interesting perspectives today. I feel like all of us, despite our own differences in playtime, we've all kind of come to the same agreement on a lot of the subjects we touched on today. So thank you for tuning in. This has been Josh Grote here with Devin Payne and Nick Dvorak. Have a good one.